Hey everyone, it's Zeke, and in this video I'm going to tell you how to safely power your mining rig so that you don't burn your house down and destroy all of your mining rig. This is important to watch because your mining rig will likely be running 24/7, so you want to make sure that it is properly powered to ensure everything runs safely. Also, you can save a little bit of electricity costs by choosing the right power supply, so keep watching to find out about that. I'll try to make this as short and easy as possible to follow. I made a whole slideshow for you guys to follow, so hopefully this video is easy to watch for you guys. So let's get right into it. So first things first is the 80% rule. So basically only 80% of the power supply you have can safely be used. This is because your power supply is not 100% efficient, meaning that say it takes 1200 watts, it's only capable of giving your rig 960 watts. So if your rig needs more than that, then you'll destroy your power supply because you'll be asking for more than what's capable of giving you. Now, this isn't always 80%. You can go a little bit above it because some power supplies are rated for more than 80%, like 90% even. So yeah, but still, you should always just follow the 80% rule when working with anything like power supply or cable related. Now, this is important because you want your mining rig TDP to be 80% of the total PSU wattage. Now, this is because if your overclock settings ever crash and reset, then your rig might be running at 100% load, and if that's not 80% of what the power supplies can handle, then you're going to be overloading your PSUs and potentially cause a fire hazard. Now, this is mostly an issue with Windows because Windows is less stable for mining, but HiveOS is better. So if you're running Windows, then you definitely have to have this set up properly. It's also a good thing to have your power supply set up properly because you'll be able to mine any coin, because like some coins like Raven Coin and Flux almost take the max of the GPUs. So like, just good to have your mining rig set up so that if your GPUs have to run at 100%, then your power supplies can handle this efficiently and properly. And then if you're running two power supplies, then the TDP might always add up properly. So just make sure that whatever power supplies you're running, each power supply won't be asked to use more than 80% of the total load. Alright, and now on to efficiency ratings. So basically, the better the efficiency rating, the lower your electricity bill, because like this 80 plus titanium at 100% load, it's 90% efficient. So basically means that like if it's given 1000 watts, 90% of that will actually be given to your system. Whereas like if you use an 80 plus white or 80 plus bronze, say it's given 1000 watts, it's only going to be able to give 80% to 82% of that to your rig. And then definitely don't go for anything below 80% because 70% efficiency is just really bad. It's going to take up a lot more electricity, and there's not really any good power supplies that are rated for this. I think that the lowest you should go is 80 plus silver. Anything below that is bad. Now, like for gaming PCs, 80 plus bronze is fine because like you're not going to be using your gaming PC 24/7. Where like for mining rigs, you're going to be running these most of the time probably. So it's good just to have a really good power supply because this is what's feeding you the electricity, and like the only expense for a mining rig is electricity. So why not go for a really good power supply? And like say you have an 80 plus titanium, yeah, it's going to cost a lot more, but like once everything's paid off, you're going to be using a lot less electricity compared to like an 80 plus silver or gold even. Alright, so let's go on to the cables. So in the power supply box, you're going to come with SATA cables, which are these guys, Molex cables, these ones, 8-pin CPU cables, which are these, and then there's 24-pin cables, which look like this, they're really big, and then there's the VGA cables, which I forgot to add a photo here, but they look similar to this. Now, SATA cables, they're only used to power storage devices. You can power other things with it, but it's just not the best. But just basically, they're mostly used for powering storage devices. Same with Molex cables. You can use these for powering like fans and whatnot, but yeah, they're basically kind of mostly for storage devices. Then there's the 8-pin CPU cables. These are only for CPUs. Now you might get confused with these because they look similar to GPU cables, but the actual pins are a little bit different and don't fit into GPUs. So yeah, they're only used for CPUs. And then the 24-pin cables, they're really massive because they power the whole motherboard and everything connected to the motherboard. Like you connect fans to the motherboard, storage devices like M.2s, your RAM, sometimes your CPU. But yeah, a lot of things get power from your motherboard, so that's why they have a lot of cables in them. And then there's the PCI Express or VGA cables. There's two different names for them, but just basically they're GPU cables, and these are used to power your GPUs and GPU risers. So let's get right into how you actually use them. So first things is that SATA and Molex cables, they're only rated for 54 watts maximum, and with the 80% rule, you can safely use 43 to 45% with them, or 45 watts. And then the PCIe and VGA cables, which is what you use for GPUs, these are rated for a max of 300 watts. So the 80% rule, you can safely use 240 to 250 watts of these, just because you don't want to overload the cable and ask for like what the maximum it can handle. Because yeah, it can handle 300 watts, but you don't want to ask for 300 watts because that could cause a fire. You just want to avoid fire hazards basically. So when you're actually using the cables, here's what you need to know. So each 8-pin connection on the GPU is going to ask for a total of 125 watts maximum. That's for each 8-pin connection. And then for the 6-pin connections on the GPU risers, these are going to ask for a maximum of 75 watts. So when you're using the cable, whatever it's connected to, you want to make sure that the cable's not going to be asked to run more than 240 to 250 watts. Because going back here, 80% rule, you can safely use this amount of watts from it. So see your cable's connected to like 2 of these 8-pin connectors on a GPU, that's max, like that's all it can handle. You can't put anything more than that safely. Like you can't run a GPU riser and 2 of these 8-pin connectors because that's going to be more than 240 to 250 watts. But what you can do is connect an 8-pin connector and a 6-pin connector on the GPU riser together with the splitter cable. So you can have 125 and 75 watts total. That's 200 watts total. The cable is going to be asked to run, and that's safe. So yeah, in theory, just make sure that each PCI Express and VGA cable will never be asked to run more than 240 to 250 watts. That's basically everything you need to know about this. It's pretty simple actually. And if you're wondering why you don't want to use SATA and Molex on your GPU riser, that's because, like I said here, these SATA cables and Molex cables can only run 45 to 43 watts total, like safely. They're rated for 54, but you don't want to use all of that because that's just unsafe. But like I said here, the 6-pin cable or connection on the risers will ask for a max of 75 watts. So if you're asking for 75, but these SATA cables can only do this much total, then you know you're going to be overloading these cables, and that's why you see fires caused by these and people having horror stories with their GPU risers burning up because they're powering with SATA. The only reason why people do this is because like they're cheap out on their power supplies and the power supply doesn't have enough cables to run the GPU risers, so they just use SATA and this stuff because it, you know, that they can, but it's just not safe. And that's why you should only use these GPU cables to power your GPU risers because they can actually handle that. And then a couple more things, that if you're using 2 power supplies to power your mining rig, basically you want to make sure that each GPU and riser, like the GPU and the riser it's connected to, are connected to the same power supply. This is because, like I said, the TDP of your GPU comes from both the 8-pin connectors on the GPU and the GPU riser. So if your motherboard doesn't know like which power supply these are coming from, if they're coming from 2 different power supplies, then that's just a problem waiting to happen. So just make sure that the GPU riser and the GPU are connected to the same power supply. So like the cables it's getting power from come from the same power supply. And do this for all the GPUs. So you can have like, you know, a couple GPUs on this one and a couple on this one, and all the risers for those GPUs are from the same power supply the GPU is connected to. And then as for actually using the power supplies connected together, what you do is you plug in the main components to one power supply, like the fans, the motherboard, on all that, and then maybe a couple GPUs into that. And then plug this into the first port on the motherboard. Now you might have like a mining motherboard that has a couple ports for 24 pins. Just connect like the main power supply into the first one, and then all the secondary power supplies into the extra ports. And then if you don't have one of those, you just have like a normal gaming motherboard, you're gonna need one of these 24 pin splitter cables. So what you do is plug in the main power supply into this like big one here. This goes into the motherboard. Plug in the main power supply to this one that has most of the cables on it, and then the secondary power supply, plug it into this second cable that's on the side. And yeah, these are pretty cheap. They're not that expensive and actually pretty handy because you don't have to buy like a massive, you know, 1700 watt power supply here when you can just use 2 of these for cheaper. So yeah, that's basically it for using 2 power supplies. And just a couple last things I want to note is that make sure the power supplies you're using are connected to your electricity grid properly. So like each electricity grid, I think like each outlet and circuit is rated for a max of 1800 watts total. So like following the 80% rule, you can only use like 1600 watts total in that. This is with the traditional 15 amp breaker and a 120 volt outlet. So like you don't want to plug in more than 1600 watts into your circuit because then you're going to be overloading it and you could trip a breaker, which then that means your mining rig is going to shut off and you have to turn the breaker back on before it starts mining again. So like that takes away from your mining profits. So what you might have to do is plug in one power supply into one outlet and then another power supply into another outlet that's on a whole different circuit. And then you might have to check just your whole electricity system in your house, make sure that, like, say there's a fridge plugged into an outlet and you're plugging a 1300 watt power supply into the same outlet, that's going to trip a breaker if the fridge goes and compresses, because I think a fridge takes a lot of power for like a couple seconds and then goes back to like a couple watts. So yeah, just do some research about like plugging in your rigs to the walls if you're taking like more than 1600 watts total. If you're a small miner, you probably don't have to worry about this. And if you're a big miner, you're definitely gonna have like an electrician to come in and fix everything, because big miners that have like massive basements of mining rigs, they have like 30 amp breakers and 240 volt plugs, because these can handle a lot more watts, and even ASICs as well. But yeah, I just wanted to say that. And also, if you're using like extension cables to plug in a power supply to a different circuit, then make sure that the extension cable is rated for the power supply. So like, say it's a 1600 watt power supply, you want to make sure that the cable running at 80% of the total it's rated for is 1600 watts. So yeah, just want to get that out of the way. That's basically it for this video. I hope you can now power your mining rig safely, and that this video is easy to follow. If you have any questions or suggestions for my videos, just comment down below, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.